the tool stack that I'm using on my daily activities. And without spoiling anything, unfortunately, I do not use any super cool tools. I use very basic tools to achieve what I need. You just need to create a stack that works for you, and that allows you to implement solutions that are expected by your customers. So those are the tools. I'm using Python as the main programming language because it is very easy to understand even for non-IT participants of the IoT initiative. It is just easy to explain the main concepts, and it is very versatile. You can write the application logic, the backend logic, and do way more things with Python. By the way, if you are just starting and you would like to learn Python, I recommend this Python 3 bootcamp that covers basics of Python in a very nice manner. So I strongly recommend going through that. I'm not the author of this Git repository, though it is very, very good. I also recommend Python because you can use it to write logic on devices. You can leverage MicroPython, which allows you to use Python syntax and write logic on very, very smooth hardware. To be very honest with you, I'm not really sure if I would recommend using MicroPython for actual production deployments. The last time I checked, there were a few security concerns with how the MicroPython implement various features. Though if you are just starting and you want to be able to create that end-to-end flow, I think MicroPython is a decent tool to have. I also often use JupyterLab. JupyterLab is something that allows you to mix the source code with markdown documentation and with a dynamic dashboard. So I use this tool during trainings that I deliver, during presentations, and also for demonstration purposes to business stakeholders. I think this is very, very nice tool, mainly used by data scientists, but I use it to manage IoT infrastructure and it works just fine. Then we've got something that is specific to AWS, because I've got a bit of history with AWS. If you would like to work with other cloud provider, then unfortunately you need to find tools that work for that. I'm pretty sure that you will be able to find, but if you decide to start with AWS, I highly recommend using CDK, which stands from Cloud Development Kit, because it allows you to manage cloud infrastructure using various high-level programming languages, Python included. What is important about it is that you use CDK to manage your static infrastructure, your servers, your Lambda functions, API gateways, all of that. But you typically do not use CDK to create AWS infrastructure that represents IoT devices, because you might have hundreds of thousands of IoT devices and you will hit limits of AWS CDK, or actually the AWS CloudFormation that is generated by CDK itself. So to manage dynamic AWS infrastructure, I do recommend AWS SDK for Python. Well, once again, Python. So as I told you, I try to keep things simple and use a single language to achieve various goals. That might be the application development, but also managing of the cloud infrastructure. And the AWS SDK for Python, called Boto3, allows you to invoke low-level AWS APIs using Python code. And this approach opens up the potential to manage huge fleet of IoT devices when you've got hundreds of thousands of devices connected to your system. Then you probably want to manage them using Boto3, and for on-demand actions that need to change the AWS infrastructure, the SDK for Python, that would be something that I recommend. Now, something trivial. So the code editor, I use VS Code, but I'm tempted to switch to Eclipse THEIA, which is essentially the replacement of VS Code. This is purely for personal reasons. I have not switched yet because THEIA is at the early stage of its development, but I think that is a valid alternative. Something very important, once you start playing with all of those technologies, you will generate quite a lot of source code. That might be the configuration, that might be application logic. I strongly recommend using Git to version all of that, even if you are the only developer for that specific project. And a number of times I changed something and that caused some very, very unexpected outcomes. And without having things tracked in a Git repository, that would be very hard for me actually to recover from that mistake. So I strongly recommend that. If you are new to Git, there is a free PDF version of the ProGit book, which guides you from zero to hero on the Git functionality, how to use it as a developer. I strongly recommend that. For diagrams, I use Draw.io, and this is basically the tool that you see on my screen. I think this is very, very good tool to create various diagrams, various designs. It is free to use, works in the browser, and yeah, it is just a perfect tool for me. But before you can design anything, probably you should learn UML, which is the language that we use to model various abstractions, both regarding the software and hardware, the business use cases, all of that. So I suggest UML as a good starting point, and then BPMN, which is also focused on modeling, but from the business process perspective. So as I told you before, as an IoT consultant, you will interact not only with technical people, but also with business people, and being able to design business processes, or at least understand existing business processes documented using the BPMN notation. I think this is pretty important. Regarding the communication, I said that I'm a huge fan of MQTT, and this is a very versatile tool. I highly recommend the Mosquito by Eclipse Foundation. This is both the MQTT broker and client, so you can use it to facilitate the MQTT connectivity, and you can use client int provide to emulate devices. I use this tool very frequently for prototyping purposes. When I host a training or during conferences, I use Mosquito to show how the MQTT communication looks under the hood. I was speaking about creating APIs. For that, I use Postman. That is a great tool to build APIs. The interfaces exposed by your backend, and those interfaces can be consumed, for instance, by the devices themselves. Of course, I try to experiment with new tools, like with new models. My personal opinion is that we are not there yet regarding usage of those models. You need to know what you want to achieve using them, and you need to carefully validate the outcomes, though they help to get started and to have maybe some basic template in place. But then you need to fine tune it yourself. At least this is my experience. And of course, Docker, this is something that I already covered. I think this is a great tool, not only for experimenting and for learning phase, but also once you are already established IoT professional, you will use Docker for various occasions. So this is the tool stack that I'm using. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or on YouTube. If you've got any questions, put them in comments and I will get back to you. That's all that I prepared for today. I hope that it was interesting for you, that it showed you how to enter the IoT space, both from the organizational perspective and from the technical perspective. Let me know in comments if you found that interesting, if there are any topics that you would like me to cover in the future. I'm Łukasz Malinowski, the Internet of Things advisor and trainer.